Mordhau has a game mode problem, more specifically a frontline game mode problem. It has raised many issues, and while so many people, including me, have had probably some of the best and funnest gaming experiences in the last few years on this frontline mode, it has some issues. So let's talk about that. Oh no, that's the HD. Oh, what's the mythical one? First off, let's get this straight. Frontline mode in Mordhau isn't really frontline. Well, that's its name. It's a little bit confused between two other game modes, and this is a conquest or a generic conquest game mode and a more attacker and defense mode, or a sort of a push and pull sort of game mode. And this is confusing for the average gamer going into it thinking frontline is going to be this very pushing pull sort of thing, but really is focusing more towards a conquest mode, but still has the same mechanics of a different game mode. And this is where it really comes into its problems. I mean, when you go into a frontline mode, you have that issue, where you spawn in as either red or blue, and depending on the map, one team will have a clear advantage, and this is pretty much a given throughout the map. I mean, if you spawn in on the tiger map, it's pretty much a given if you're playing as the red team that you've got a better chance of winning. If you're playing in on the mountain peak map, if you're playing as the red team, you've now got a better chance of losing because the blue team has the advantage on this one. And this goes through all the maps. Camp, you've got more advantage playing as red. Grad, you've got more advantage playing as red. Of course, there are exceptions to this, but this is majoritively of the time, depending on which mode you spawn in on and which team you decide to choose and who you're playing with, of course, because that has a massive impact if you're playing with a larger group of people that want to work together. Now, whilst there are some exceptions, most of the time this is going to happen, and it's a little bit annoying to say the least. And the biggest complaint has been the imbalance of these maps. It always ends up with whoever starts winning within the first 10 minutes of the round is most likely going to win the round at the end of it. There's not really much coming back from it once you start losing. One team will push, and it's not really much of a push back. There's always just trying to hold out as long as you possibly can, but you're gonna lose anyway because they had that advantage from the start. Now, there's a way to solve this. Now, of course, this whole video is just my opinion, but also it came from a good idea of one of the comments on one of my previous videos. This guy came up with a push mode, which would be so much better to make frontline into a full-out conquest mode fully, and then have a separate game mode as the push mode, instead of having the frontline as it currently is, which is a bit of a mix between this new push mode, as I'll explain, and of course the generic conquest mode that we all know and love. But if they put the conquest mode and the push separate, basically splitting the frontline into two game modes, I think it would have a much better effect on the player base itself, keep the balance, and people will be less confused of why they keep losing. And I do think it's because they assume this frontline mode is a generic conquest mode, but it isn't really. They wouldn't be so confused at why they keep losing at the red team on Mountain Peak map if they knew that this was a push game mode rather than conquest, because of course conquest mode is basically as it is now, but more balanced. If you think about conquest in Battlefield, each team starts in the same places, they have the same type of objectives that they have to take, and they gain these capture points and they gain better advantages throughout, but they're both on very even terms. There's not one team that's got maybe a closer objective or a better objective in able to hold out on. They both have pretty even numbers, so it comes completely down to teamwork and skill, which points you capture, but there's no one team that has the advantage. It doesn't matter where you spawn, you're all on a balanced setting. But the front line doesn't have that. It has the points making people think this is a conquest mode, but it doesn't have the balance of a conquest mode. It has the balance of a push mode, and a push mode is where you have it where one team is attacking and one team is defending. This could come out and sort of overlay into a siege mode, but I do feel like if you want these more open battles, it would fit more on its own. But this is where the attackers have to take 1 point, and then they can move forward to the next point and the next point, and their defenders have to try and defend that point, but if they lose it, they have to pull back to their next defenses, and then their defenses get better and better, so it makes it attacking harder and harder. But of course the attacker has that advantage from the start, which is the point of the attacker, and this is where the frontline mode is mixed up, calling itself frontline but using the sort of layout of a conquest mode, even though the gameplay and the mechanics and the balance lends itself more to a push mode. So actually one team does have the advantage, which is fine for this type of attacker and defender mode, but not for a conquest mode, which is what they're trying to pull it off as. Now, of course, I think a siege mode would probably conquer this if the siege mode wasn't just a siege mode. If we think about a siege mode as a Mount and Blade siege mode, I don't think it would work, or at least not in this sort of setting. Maybe in its own game mode, but what if we had a siege mode combined with this push mode where you have attackers and defending, pulling back into certain checkpoints that you had to defend and then keep pulling back as a defender and of course keep pushing as an attacker? What if we put that siege mode and the push mode together? There we have it, where the first point that the defenders have to defend is pretty hard to defend, and the attackers might easily take that. So the defenders have to pull back to a bit better guarded place, and the attackers push forward. They can now spawn at the place we've just taken, and they push forward to the next one, and so on, until they get to a castle where the defenders have a full castle to defend against, and then the attackers now get some siege weaponry and things in order to get over it. So it has this push mode and the feel of a field battle, but then morphing its way into a siege, and I think this would work really well. And the reason I'm saying this, because I have a suspicion that something like this is in the works. I mean, look at the camp map. It shows that the Reds are attacking. Quite obviously, they do have the advantage on this map. What they have to do is they have to take the river checkpoint, and then they have to get up the hill onto the place where the blue teams have their gunpowder cart. They have to push that cart up while the blues have to try and stop them. So it's clear that the developers wanted this to be a very attacking and defending type map. But because of the even points, no one really sees it as an attacking defending. They see it as an all-out field battle. But if you look at the map closely, once the Reds have pushed up that gunpowder barrel, then normally they'd win. But what if the blue team fall back to that castle? What if the red team take the camp and the blue team have to fall back to the castle? Now you may be asking, what castle? Well, if anyone has played on this map, and you will see as the blue team, if you look behind you when you spawn in at your initial spawn, yes, there is a castle in the distance. At the moment, it is out of bounds and just scenery, but why would there be a road leading up to it? Why would there be little houses there? And why would they bother to render that castle anyway? Yes, it could just be for looks, but could this be the final stages of this push/siege mode that may be on its way? I mean, think about it. Once the Reds have pushed up, the Blues have lost that camp. The gunpowder cart has blown open the gates. Now the Blues have to fall back. And the only place after the camp, in the game mode that it is at the moment, that's where the end of the battle is. But what if they have to push back even further to that castle? The Reds then get these siege towers. They get maybe some catapults. And of course, they still have the trebuchets that are on that map. Why would there be trebuchets in a field battle if this was a field battle? I know it just looks cool for scenery and sort of the gameplay mechanics, but could this mean any more? I mean, that amount of trebuchets normally would be used to attack a castle, which is what we can see in the distance. And now, of course, this is just speculation, but I think these are some pretty cool hints to what if this is going to happen. And developers, if you are listening, if this isn't the plan already, goddamn make this the plan, because that would be absolutely awesome. It's rather clear on the Mountain Peak map as well that there's influences on a siege. I mean, the whole point is the Reds are spawning in a castle and they have to go out and try and defend the outside of it. They have to defend the Blues pushing the ram up, and the end of the frontline mode on the Mountain Peak map, you see the Blues battering down that gate. But a lot of the time, the Blues seem to swamp the Reds, sort of indicating towards them being the attackers, of course. And maybe this could mean that the Mountain Peak map is just a section of what could be a bigger future siege map. The Blues push in, they batter down the gate, and instead of the round ending where it does at the current frontline mode, it carries on. The fight is taken into the castle, and then that has a lot of potential to be some really fun gameplay. Now, I think all the maps have attack and defender, some clearer than the others, but is it that the developers are planning on these being bigger maps than what we have at the moment? Or is this just me being completely out the blue and speculative? Who knows, but I really think that this could be something that could be happening, and if it does, I really hope it did, because it will fix this frontline problem. I mean, Grad is the most obvious siege type of map in frontline. I mean, you actually get to go into the castle and fight in it, but it's been altered for this game mode with battered down bits of walls, so it's easier and more even for a frontline mode, so you can just get into the castle without needing actual siege stuff. But we did see in the trailer that you can, you know, fire catapults onto the walls of sieges and things like that. And I would love if a siege mode came and then all the walls on Grad at the moment that are battered down will be fixed for that siege mode, and then they'd get battered down so you could get up to it. That would be awesome for a new siege mode on the map Grad, which is the one that has the most obvious siege mode type-esque bits in it. But as I said at the beginning, I do feel like the frontline mode as it is at the moment is confused in what it actually is, merging an attacking and defending sort of game mode with a conquest game mode, which doesn't really work since it confuses players to why they keep losing on certain teams, because they think this is just a conquest game mode, but it actually isn't. But maybe this could be hints of things coming in the future. But I'd really love to see what your thoughts are down below. Make sure you leave a comment, and if you don't, then I will have to hunt you down and kill you with my evening star. But thank you so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for more Mordhau content. But if you haven't already, leave a like on the video, and I will see you in the next one.